Hi, welcome to TheGunBlog.ca. My name is Nicholas Johnson. Today I want to look back to events of May 1st, 2020, and specifically the two so-called orders in council that the government of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau inflicted upon the country's government-licensed gun owners. I'm going to look at the two orders in council in detail and a little bit about what's wrong with them. And I'm recording this in late August of 2023. So these are events that happened more than 2 years ago. And even though it happened that long ago, there are a lot of gun owners who still don't know that there were two orders in council. They don't know what the document said, and they don't know why they're wrong. So I'm doing this little explainer video to help them out. Before we get started, I want to say a disclaimer and a disclosure. I am not a lawyer. I'm not a legal expert. This is not legal advice. I'm a guy who's been watching the policy developments and analyzing them and providing updates and news on them to the readers of TheGunBlog.ca for coming up now soon to be 10 years. So I'm just an interested person looking at this and giving my best faith understanding and interpretation of what happened and what it means. Let's get into it. The first order in council that we're going to look at is so-called SOR 2020-96. SOR stands for Statutory Orders and Regulations, and this is its identifier. I guess that's the 96th one that came out in 2020. Here's the title. Oof, what a real mouthful. Let's try to do this. Regulations, amending the regulations prescribing certain firearms and other weapons, components, and parts of weapons, accessories, cartridge magazines, ammunition, and projectiles as prohibited, restricted, or non-restricted. Let me just start by breaking that down. So these are regulations. What's proposed below are regulations amending this document. And this document, there's a way to shorten this to regulations prescribing certain firearms as prohibited, restricted, or non-restricted. So what this is, this document published in the Canada Gazette, I'm taking the version that was published in the Canada Gazette on May 1st of 2020. What this document is this is the ban list. This is SOR 2020-96. It's the regulations that are quite long. You can see we'll go see in a sec. They're quite long. And it's a ban list. It's a list of firearms that are prohibited. Okay, and now let's go through the document. I'm reading this online. As I said, it's August of 2023. Canada Gazette, Part 2, Volume 154, Extra Number 3. This was an extra edition of the Canada Gazette. The Canada Gazette is the government's official newsletter. It's where things that are meant to be public, that's where the government prints them. SOR 2020-96, May 1st, 2020, regarding the criminal code. That's the order in council number. So what does that mean? The government changed these regulations. How did it do that? It did it by order in council. So the order in council is the mechanism by which it changed the regulations. That is different from legislation, when a bill has to go through the House of Commons and then the Senate in order to be approved. This is by a so-called order in council, and it's an executive decree. The short version is that it's the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister essentially Prime Minister and Cabinet do what they want, and it's officially signed off by the Governor General in Council. Okay? So the governor in council, that's the cabinet, the government cabinet, Trudeau and whoever else he wants to include at the table. So let's just read what this says. Whereas the governor in council is not of the opinion that anything prescribed to be a prohibited firearm or a prohibited device in the annexed regulations is reasonable for use in Canada for hunting or sporting purposes. So the way I understand that, the cabinet is not of the opinion that anything on this list is reasonable for use in Canada for hunting or sporting purposes. Okay. Now, by one interpretation of the Criminal Code and Firearms Act, the cabinet is allowed to decide on its own what to prohibit and what not to. That interpretation of the law is challenged. There's several challenges in federal court at the moment, but that's the government's interpretation. All it has to do is give an opinion. Okay. Next paragraph, and we won't read the whole thing because it's quite long, but I just want to, for people who've never looked at this document, it can be quite useful to see. Therefore, so Therefore, Her Excellency, the Governor General in Council, that's the Governor General, on the recommendation of the Minister of Justice, at the time that was David Lametti, pursuant to the definitions of non-restricted firearm, prohibited device, prohibited firearm, and restricted firearm in subsection 84.1 of the Criminal Code and to subsection 117.151 of that Act, makes the annexed regulations. Okay. Whew, this is a mouthful. And you wonder, it's just this first little parentheses here. You wonder, this is stuff that affects hundreds of thousands, millions of people. And how are we supposed to understand this? This is really hard to understand. I've read this a bunch of times now over the years. It's really hard to understand. And then we'll just watch this. And then you're supposed to go through this long, long list of guns that are now prohibited. So why this matters? I have a restricted license, a possession and acquisition license with a quote-unquote restricted classification. That means I'm allowed to own so-called restricted firearms. That's this arbitrary category, right? The arbitrary categories that the government made up: restricted, non-restricted, prohibited. I'm not allowed to own prohibited firearms. So look at this long list. I'm just going to go through the list so you get an idea of what's involved. It's AR-15s, it's Mini 14s, it's M1As, it's shotguns, it's a whole bunch. Just the purpose of this is not to go through the ban list. That's a separate thing. You probably know it includes 22s. Like it's a whole long list of makes and models and that are targeted. So that's what this is. Now this is the first OIC, and I'm going to also, now I want to get into what they call the Regulatory Impact Analysis Statement. And there's just a couple lines in there that are relevant to what we're doing. And I'm going to do a word search here for liability. Okay, here we go. So what did this first OIC, Order in Council, what did this first OIC do? It made you an outlaw if you own any of the firearms listed. All these 2,000 guns that were added to this list, if you own any of those, you're an outlaw. The order declaring an amnesty period, so that's the second OIC, that's the amnesty, accompanies the regulations to protect individuals who were in lawful possession of one or more of the newly prohibited firearms or prohibited devices on the day the regulations came into force from criminal liability for unlawful possession, for the purpose of allowing individuals to come into compliance with the law. So what does that mean? Translated, this Order in Council made you an outlaw if you owned any of the firearms listed, and in order to protect you from criminal liability, they issued the amnesty order. That's the second OIC. We'll get to that next. But just to be clear, a lot of people think that, no, they're fine. It's just a gun ban and whatever. No, you were criminalized. Technically speaking, you are a criminal. You are outside the law, not because you did something wrong, but because the government changed the definition of what's legal and what's illegal. They changed the definition of what guns you are allowed to use. The guns in your safe that you've been using for however long, days, months, years before May 1st of 2020, if they're on this list, just by having them, even though you didn't do anything wrong, you are now at risk of criminal liability. But to protect you from getting prosecuted and handcuffed and stuff, they issued the amnesty order. Okay, but just to be clear, the purpose of this is criminalize and confiscate. They say this a bunch of times. Let's go to the conclusion, the very last line of the RIAS, Regulatory Impact Analysis Statement. The amendment to the classification regulations and the amnesty order come into force on the day on which they are made. That means they came into force on that day, May 1st of 2020. The amnesty order will expire on April 30th, 2022. Those who remain in possession of these firearms or devices at the end of the amnesty period could be subject to criminal liability for unlawful possession. That's what the government said. So it wants to criminalize you simply for owning these guns. That's OIC number 1. Now I'm going to go to OIC number 2. That's the order declaring an amnesty period, 2020. That's SOR 2020-97. So we're back. These two things were issued simultaneously. Again, I'm reading this version. This version is from the Canada Gazette. You can see the details there. So Her Excellency the Governor in Council, on the recommendation of the Minister of Justice, pursuant to makes the annexed order declaring an amnesty period. So that's essentially it's the Governor General doing what Cabinet tells her to. Here are some definitions. Here's the gist, though. The amnesty period set out in subsection 3 is declared under section 117.14 of the Criminal Code for a person who, on the day on which this order comes into force, owns or possesses a specified firearm and holds a license that was issued under the Firearms Act. In other words, this order applies to you if you have a PAL and you owned one of the guns in the ban list on May 1st of 2020. Okay, there's other things to consider here, and the purpose of the amnesty period is to permit the person to. So if the reason you got this amnesty is to deactivate the gun, so it's no longer a firearm, but to deactivate, aka destroy, deliver the specified firearm or specified device to a police officer for destruction or other disposal, and various other things, export and so forth. Transport, this is all kind of, it was important at the time, it's not so important today. The amnesty period begins on the day on which this order comes into force and ends on April 30th, 2022. And here, note, the regulatory impact analysis statement for this order appears following SOR 2020-96. So you have to read these as two OICs that came in parallel. And the purpose of them, as it's right, is to makes you a criminal for owning the listed firearms and gives you until this date, April 30th of 2022, to surrender them to police or destroy them. So that's why I called it a criminalization and confiscation order in council. A lot of people call it bans. Bans is a great word because it's short. It's bad. It's bad, but it's a bad word because it doesn't fully reflect what really happened. It's what the government did on May 1st of 2020. They criminalized hundreds of thousands of people and ordered us to surrender our firearms. So it's a criminalization and confiscation order is what happened on May 1st, 2022. Okay. Very simple. So now, if you didn't know there were two OICs, now you know there were two OICs. One was the ban list, and one was the amnesty, the so-called amnesty. And why do I say so-called amnesty? Because it's a very limited and partial amnesty. It's partial because it has an expiry date. That's been extended, but at the time it was a 2-year amnesty period. But the amnesty only covered you if you kept your guns locked in your safe. In other words, you buy, sell, borrow, you go to jail. You take them to the range, you risk jail and instant confiscation. So it's not even fair to call it an amnesty. You should use the qualifier, the limited, partial, temporary amnesty. Normally what happens when the government's going to make a sweeping change like this, they give you a long lead time. They say, like the gasoline, we're going to phase out gasoline over the next 15 years. They give you 15 years to come into compliance with the new law. Or we're going to phase out such and such a technology or a product or a license. We're going to phase it out over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. They give you tons of time to come into force. On May 1st, 2020, they didn't do that. All right. Now, if you want to learn more about this, here's the ban list. You can see there. You can at the time it was 1,500 models and designs. Now it's closer to 2,000. You can see some tons of very popular firearms. Essentially any firearm design of the 20th century. Basically almost every semi-auto rifle. Not only rifles, also some shotguns, some bolt actions. What was wrong with it? I want to just quickly go. This is, you can find this at TheGunBlog.ca. The link for this information, by the way, is liberal gun bans. If you go to the website, you click at the top, liberal gun bans. You can get to this page. Also, at the bottom of that page, you'll see here the reference section. If you want to know about Canada's gun laws, you can just go there. But I'm not going to do that right now. What I also wanted to say is what was wrong? Why were these two orders in council wrong? Besides what you think about gun ownership, that's a separate thing. Why were they wrong from a ethics and justice point of view? I'm just going to read this. This is on the website at TheGunBlog.ca. They were arbitrary. The confiscation orders turned honest, lawful individuals into potential criminals out of the blue. Vague. It left hundreds of thousands of people unsure if they are committing a criminal offense, and they have no way of finding out. The number of people still today who are checking, are my guns on the list? They don't know. They don't even, some PAL holders don't even know this thing happened, and they don't know that their bolt-action rifle or semi-auto rifle or shotgun is on this list. It's vague. It was poorly communicated. It's sweeping. The confiscation order cracks down on millions of individuals without legitimate reason. Immoral. The confiscation order punishes individuals and businesses who have done nothing immoral or harmful. It forces us to take immediate action to avoid criminal charges or jail. In other words, immediate action, lock it up in your safe and don't touch it. You take it to the range, you buy, sell. You're at severe risk of criminal liability. It's unjust. The confiscation order punishes individuals and businesses who were in full compliance with the law. That's not supposed to be how the law works. If you're in compliance with the law, you don't risk criminal liability. It was sudden. The confiscation order came in the middle of the day without warning. It was retroactive. The confiscation order is deemed to have taken effect before it was even published. A weird thing about Canadian law. The OICs were published, let's say in the middle of the day, or middle of the day Toronto time on May 1st of 2020. But technically, the way these things work is they took effect at 0 o'clock that day. So they were retroactive about 12 hours. So things that you had done in the morning, you could have been charged with without even knowing that they were illegal. It's so messed up. Laws are not supposed to be retroactive. Contempt of Parliament. This bypasses parliamentary scrutiny and oversight put forth in the Constitution. It violates basic policy principles, legal certainty. Laws are supposed to be certain. You're supposed to know what the law is. Regulatory clarity, stability, and predictability. You're supposed to know what the laws are going to be. You shouldn't be surprised by a legal change. Procedural transparency. These things were done in secret. Nobody knew they were coming. That's not how the law is supposed to work. Non-retroactivity. We just talked about that one. All right. One more point before I close out. The cost. The government has not said how much this thing is going to cost. We know it's going to cost billions of dollars. They haven't said publicly, but someone put me in touch with this document, and they estimated it in 2019, late 2019, that it would cost $1.8 billion. So that's their estimate. That's their kind of unofficial estimate according to, and so again, hugely costly. We're not going to talk about what's wrong with that. I'm going to close out now. I just wanted to, again, just quickly go over these two orders in council because a lot of people didn't know that there were two orders in council, and just to help you understand what each one was and why they matter, and in particular, why they're both wrong. Thank you for watching TheGunBlog.ca. If you like what I write and if you like these videos, I invite you to subscribe. Thanks for watching.